Wednesday will make 89. Trips before Congress, that is. When Robert S. Mueller appears on Capitol Hill Wednesday, it will mark his 89th appearance before Congress. And according to the New York Times, that's among the most of any official ever. If that's the case, why is everyone from the president to the Democrats to Mueller's closest allies so darn anxious about it? For the president, the explanation comes from a close friend and ally who describes him as, quote, the Sun King, who loathes anyone in any moment that blocks the spotlight from him. It's also possible that even the president can't predict what hours and hours of live wall-to-wall coverage of Robert Mueller testifying about the president's efforts to obstruct the investigation into the Russian attacks on our election will do to his political standing. For Mueller's allies, it's a combination of concern that by-the-book Mueller, who sticks to the facts and only the facts, will be outmatched by the tribal politics of this moment. And for the Democrats, it's the knowledge that Mueller's long-awaited testimony offers them their last and only chance to gain traction on a public message about Donald Trump's criminal conduct in thwarting the special counsel's investigation and the Trump team's nearly 150 unexplained contacts with Russians. Jerry Nadler, chairman of House Judiciary, and Adam Schiff, chairman of House Intel, the two committees before which Mueller will appear, weighed in.
The president and the attorney general have lied to the American people about what was in the Mueller report. I believe that when people hear what was in the Mueller report, then we'll be in a position to begin holding the president accountable.
That's a pretty damning set of facts that most American people are not familiar with. And of course, the president keeps on trying to deceive them about those facts. But who better to bring them to life than the man who did the investigation himself?
The New York Times is out with their list of questions for Mueller. Here are a few of those. If Mr. Trump were an ordinary citizen, would you have found that there was sufficient evidence to charge him with obstruction of justice? Do you believe President Trump cooperated with your investigation? How many witnesses refused to cooperate? And this one, did you intend for your report to serve as a referral for Congress for possible impeachment proceedings? The president didn't miss an opportunity to smear Mueller this morning in the Oval. It was full of lies, so we'll fact check it for you on the other side, but we're showing it to you because it underscores his anxiety.
No, I'm not going to be watching, probably, maybe I'll see a little bit of it. I'm not going to be watching Mueller because you can't take all those bites out of the apple. We had no collusion, no obstruction. We had no nothing. They're wasting their time. And Robert Mueller, I know he's conflicted. He had there's a lot of conflicts that he's got, including the fact that his best friend is Comey. But he's got conflicts with me, too. He's got big conflicts with me.
Despite Trump's claims to the contrary, here are the facts. Robert Mueller, who Trump calls highly conflicted, is in fact a lifelong Republican with no conflicts of interest that would have excluded him from serving as the special counsel. Trump's own staff has told him this is so. That's according to their on-the-record testimony, which is then repeatedly cited in Mueller's report. And as for Trump's claim that Mueller found no collusion and no obstruction, that's also far from the truth. Here's what Mueller actually concluded in his own words.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
Trump's smear machine versus the Democrats' reluctant witness is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us at the table, GOP strategist Rick Wilson, author of Everything Trump Touches Dies. Do you update that every week?
Well, you know, the paperback had a lot of updating, and there probably need to be like a 6-volume series at this point.
I've got 10 more. Karine Jean-Pierre is back, Chief Public Affairs Officer for MoveOn.org. Plus, New York Times White House correspondent Annie Carney's back, and the former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi. We start with you, Frank, as we do on so many days. Take me through where you see this buildup. Obviously, anxiety building on the part of the president, but I think it would be, I think it's fair to say that there's some anxiety among Mueller's close allies, and there's some anxiety or at least recognition that the stakes are pretty high for Democrats as well.
Stakes are high on both sides. And for those of us who are fans of Bob Mueller and understand he's a man of unquestioned integrity, I think one of the concerns we have is that he's going to get attacked. He's going to get attacked by the GOP members who are more interested in trying to kill the messenger than to get to the messenger's findings. And I'll be keeping track at home or on the air of how many times those GOP members actually ask questions that have nothing to do with Mueller's findings, but rather serve as a distraction to attack him or the origins of the case. And then for the Democrats, look, we've always said there's value in having Mueller repeat portions of the report, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to craft questions that get him inching outside of his report and talking about things like why there were apparently different sets of rules for him versus for the Attorney General, and whether the Attorney General pulled the rug out from under him or not, and what that looked like, and whether or not, when you say no obstruction, no collusion, whether that's actually true. So that's crucial if we're going to get beyond this confirmation bias that behavioralists talk about, that people simply want to hear what they want to hear. They want to they align themselves with people who think like them. And so if we're going to get beyond that on Wednesday, we've got to get Mueller going outside of the report.
I want to sort of crack this open and pull a little bit of this out with you, Frank Figliuzzi, because I don't think there's any better use of our time than sort of preconditioning people to hear the spin for what it is. The same group of people who took Mueller's report and celebrated that no criminal conspiracy was charged will be committing, what is sort of political crimes, if you will, to then impugn the credibility of Mueller on other questions. And I guess I'm old enough to remember when a messenger was either to be believed or to be discounted, but not to take a messenger and sort of chop up his findings. I mean, just lay out the stakes for the Republicans who have held up the fact that no criminal conspiracy was charged on the collusion with Russia, which is made clear through the 150 contacts that are detailed in Volume 1, and then to call the same messenger or the same man who exonerates Trump on the conspiracy with Russia somehow a liar or discredit what he found on the obstruction volume.
They've got to try to strike this balance, this delicate balance between being accused of just jumping all over an American hero, decorated combat veteran, homicide prosecutor, FBI director for 12 years, assistant attorney general. How much can you bash this man who served the public so honorably without getting criticized for doing it? And I think they're going to stretch that envelope to the max, and I think there's a tremendous risk of it backfiring on them. The other thing to note is, look, those of us who've worked for Mueller know he will push back. He will give you the look. He will turn the facts around on you. And I don't want to be that person, because many of us have been on the other side of the conference table in the Hoover building when he's not happy, and he will win that dispute. So they need to be ready for that as well.
Annie Carney, your paper has some great reporting out today and some great analysis of where the real opportunities are to get some questions. I read a few of those questions at the top, but there are still unanswered and unexplored areas around. Again, I think your paper's done some reporting on the two letters that we know about that Mueller sent to Barr after the report came out. Just talk about how vital that period is between Mueller concluding his report, turning it over with that sort of non-conclusion conclusion around obstruction, and then when the actual report came out. It was a period where Mueller's investigators were known to have expressed some discomfort to allies in Congress, it would have appeared, to have written a couple letters to Barr himself, to have had at least one phone call with Barr that Barr was asked about. Just talk about that period where we know Mueller was uncomfortable, or some people on Mueller's team expressed discomfort with how Barr was talking about his findings.
Well, that period was incredibly important to how the report that they spent 2 years on got framed. And Mueller came out with a quick letter in which that kind of set the narrative that there was no crime here committed. This is where Trump got the no obstruction, no collusion rallying cry. And that really set the narrative. The report came out later, but kind of the stage had already been set. And Mueller met with him twice. And in Mueller's only public statement to date was his 10-minute statement on his final day as the special counsel when he gave that quote that you just played saying, if there had not been a crime committed, we would have said so. That seemed to be an implicit corrective to Barr, who seemed to blame Trump's attempts at firing the special counsel on frustration, not any criminal intent. So there does seem to be a disagreement here on intent, and this could be some of the questions that the New York Times published today that would be good to ask him is this daylight between him and Barr is an area that hasn't been explored and that he might talk about. Some of the other questions are a little wishful thinking, this idea that he would give the Democrats the soundbite they want, basically saying, but for a DOJ statute, I would have indicted the guy. That's very unlikely to happen, and Democrats have even been lowering expectations. No one thinks they're going to get that soundbite. But this area of what he told Barr in private meetings, what he told Barr in 2 letters, one was public, one wasn't, this is where we might be able to get more answers and more light.
Rick Wilson, this is from the Mueller report. And this seems like the kind of episode where he could literally flip to any page, read from it, and coming from Robert Mueller's mouth, broadcast wall to wall, would do an amount of damage that we cannot predict. We can't predict how that little swath of the country that isn't hardened in either direction will take this information. Here's the passage. The president called McGahn, that was his White House counsel, at home that night. This is around his intent and desire and will and efforts to fire Mueller. The president called McGahn at home that night and then called him on Saturday from Camp David. The evidence accordingly indicates that news that an obstruction investigation had been opened is what led the president to call McGahn to have the special counsel terminated. There also is evidence that the president knew that he should not have made those calls to McGahn. After the media reported on the president's actions, he denied that he ever ordered McGahn to have the special counsel terminated and made repeated efforts to have McGahn deny the story. Now, all that evidence of that, of those 2 examples are detailed and footnoted, and none other than Chris Christie is one of the witnesses in the president's designs on firing Mueller. So I guess my question to you is, what sort of dam could break in terms of giving the Democrats at least some momentum to calling people like Chris Christie and Corey Lewandowski and others who are named in these narratives up just on a fact-finding mission?
I think this is going to be one of the first times that the most reticent guy in this process, but who also knows the most about this thing. And I think there's a great risk, as Frank said earlier, that the Republicans are going to try to be too cute by half, and Robert Mueller will chapter and verse them out of this and say, no, well, in fact, 1, 2, and 3. Because no one's read this report. Almost every person sitting on that panel has not read this report. Robert Mueller knows it.
Our viewers have read the report.
I read the report.
I'm just saving. I'm here for you because whenever anyone says no one's read it, I get a million tweets that say, "Oh, I've read it." So the viewers of the 4 have read the report.
But there's also a moment where the primacy of television in our political lives is going to come to the fore, and Donald Trump knows this. And that little nervous moment this morning, where I might watch a little bit. No, Donald Trump will be glued to the screen with an IV drip and a catheter. He will not move during this testimony. This guy will not budge. He will watch every millisecond of it. And he's expecting his Republican allies to do the show trial thing and to do the screaming and the hair tearing and the rending of garments because they need to keep the Fox audience distracted. Now, Fox isn't covering the hearings, which should also tell you how scared they are of what could happen on this morning. It's going to be a very interesting and consequential moment. They're apparently not going to take them live. Everybody else is taking them live. And look, live TV, wall to wall, things break loose, things happen, and Robert Mueller has things in his pocket that, and look, I don't think he's going to go in and say, here's the smoking gun I couldn't give you because of Bill Barr, but I do think he's going to say, Bill Barr put his thumb on the scale. It's evident Bill Barr put his thumb on the scale. Robert Mueller did not write that letter because he was happy with how this thing turned out. Once, as Matt Schlapp, our old friend Matt Schlapp said, we have a weaponized operational attorney general who has weaponized the Department of Justice to protect Donald Trump.
Corinne, I have been plenty critical of Democrats not seizing the moment. I thought when that report came out, that was their moment. And I have been plenty critical on this show and in private. But I do think that they have successfully done 2 things in advance of Wednesday: lowering expectations to below ground level. Nancy Pelosi has taken impeachment off the table. I think there's up to 90 Democrats who are still for impeachment, but this isn't about impeachment on Wednesday. And lowering expectations for even the remotest possibility that Bob Mueller goes beyond the 4 corners of his report.
And that is exactly it, because it is going to be hard to get Bob Mueller to go outside the 4 corners of the report. And just to go back to what Rick said for a minute, the reason that Bob Mueller did the 9-minute press conference was because of what Barr did, what William Barr did, and how he narrated and took over the Robert Mueller report. And so he went out there. Look, we are also going to have a reluctant witness. Yes, this is Mueller's 89th time being in front of Congress, but he doesn't like partisanship. And we're going going to see some of that, especially from the GOP. So it is going to be a really an amazing moment. It's going to be 5 hours. We've only heard from him 9 minutes before, and it's going to be wall-to-wall coverage. And the Democrats have to be really smart about this. The questions have to be smart. They can't grandstand. They have to let him do majority of the speaking and the talking, and just let Mueller lay it out. Because yes, while the 4 o'clock, the viewers who are watching have read the Mueller report, many people have
them, right?
not. We've seen polling of like 3% of people have only read
even if they've read it, I do think there's some and what I wanted to do today, and we didn't have the time, but I'm going to ask Frank to take us through some of this. If you look at how the 9 minutes, which let's face it, Mueller did that as his goodbye public America. I mean, that he thought and hoped that would be the last time he had to do anything public. I think I see Frank Figliuzzi nodding indiscernibly. Frank, let me put this to you. If you look at the ripple, if you look at that Mueller statement as sort of a pebble thrown in the pond, that rippled through to the Oval. Donald Trump lost his you-know-what that day and for days afterward. It rippled to Congress, where I think some of their regrets spilled out into the public about not seizing the richness of that narrative that was told in the actual Mueller report, not seizing the airwaves, not telling that story, not reading from his report and focusing the public's attention on all of the horrible conduct and unflattering anecdotal evidence in the Mueller report. So if you take those 9 minutes, and I'm not good at math, but we're going to have a factor of I don't know what, someone that's good at math will tweet it to me. You'll be on TV for 5 hours. You take that ripple and you draw that out. I mean, we don't know what we don't know about the effects of Wednesday's testimony.
So the time is on the side of the questioners. And by that, I mean Mueller's history on the Hill has been to first be reticent to answer with yes, no, I'll talk to you later about it offline, that kind of answer. But when you come back at him, when the members come back at him and say, no, I want to ask this a different way, or I want you to understand I have to ask this question and I need an answer, he ultimately respects that oversight. That's the difference between Mueller and others we're seeing. And he'll answer the question. But the members need to understand they might have to ask it 2 or 3 times and in different ways and then implore him to answer the question. This gets to the notion of duty. And one of the questions, and boy, all kinds of commentators have hit all the right questions to ask. But one question I want to see Mueller asked is, Mr. Mueller, why are you here? Why ultimately did you agree? I understand there's subpoenas. I understand you may have felt like you had to do this, but ultimately you could have said no. The Attorney General actually said publicly, if you wanted to say no, the DOJ would back you on it. The administration isn't complying with any subpoenas. Why, sir, are you sitting here today? And it's that notion of duty that he's going to respond with. He's going to tell the American people, I'm here not because I love doing this, but because I love the American people and the system, and I felt it was my duty to get here and answer your questions and tell the American people what I found. That's the question he needs to be asked.
Annie Carney, I just want to ask you to put this moment in the context of the kinds of stories you've been writing the last few weeks. I mean, last week you had a story with your colleague Maggie Haberman about Donald Trump and his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. By the end of last week, we were all digging through the search warrant for Michael Cohen and reliving how Donald Trump became an unindicted co-conspirator in the Southern District of New York for the campaign finance violations and ring of crimes that helped send Michael Cohen to jail. The timing of this isn't great for Donald Trump, and he might be the only person who runs a racism campaign to distract from a criminal probe.
Well, last week's rally was originally intended to be the counter-programming Mueller rally.
That's
the
right.
Rally where
I forgot that. That's right.
That the send her back chance, that was originally scheduled on the same day as Mueller, but Mueller got rescheduled. So the counter-programming rally became a regular programming rally. And now Trump is dragging in week 2 into the fights against the 4 women congresswomen of color who call themselves the Squad. He clearly thinks this fight with the Squad is working for him. And Mueller might be actually a disruption of this. But he set this off almost accidentally on Twitter a week now more than a week ago, and he has continued against the advice of his daughter, against the advice of Republican congressmen, to continue it. So he thinks this is working for him. We'll see if Mueller is a break in that news cycle or if this is just a version of, I suspect what will happen is we'll see a version of this playing on racial divisions will be a long-running strategy, as it has been, that will take different faces, but he will continue throughout the election.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.